awesome. So I recently imported a test rig framework from Lord of the Rings into Star Wars CCG. So this particular stream is going to be doing have a couple different purposes behind it. First, this is going to operate kind of as a code review. This will be a way for me to show all the slicers that are currently in Star Wars what exactly is inside this this framework, and this will also act as a tutorial for people wanting to use it to develop cards. So item number one, I'm going to be going over kind of a high-level overview of the test rig itself, what it does, how it does it, so that you can kind of get a feel for how to use it when testing things yourself. And then once we've done that overview, we're going to move to item number two, and that's where we're going to be doing a deep dive onto Captive Fury here, one of the cards that was not implemented before. It has now been implemented, and there are 30 some odd tests that have been written in the framework for Captive Fury. We'll be going over them in detail. This is going to both show how it can be used in a very real-world process and also act as kind of an introduction into test methodology. If people aren't aware, what I do professionally is I'm a QA automation developer. This is what I do professionally, so this will be kind of doubling as both an introduction to QA, what kinds of tests you should write, and then once you realize that, how exactly you write the tests in this framework. And then number three, once we've gone over both of those things, we'll be doing a live coding session where we will be doing some coding. Son of Skywalker is the one that was suggested by Gergall, so we're going to be doing that. And then we're also going to do a few more tests that will go over writing tests for general rules system that aren't tied to any particular card. So yeah, this stream is going to take quite a while. I anticipate it will take about 2 hours or so for us to go over all of this information. Feel free to drop in and out as you need to. And if any of you here that are with me on Discord, if you have any questions, feel free to just hop in and ask them. I don't really have anything more specific than these three items, so if you have any questions, feel free to bring them up. So first and foremost, let's go ahead and start looking at this new test framework. So once this has been merged in, you'll find it in the test section of the Gemp Star Wars CCG server. So in here you'll find that besides the main in source, you'll also find a test, and inside that you will find all the stuff that has been added. The test framework itself, the test rig as I've been calling it as well, you'll find all the files that are related to that in here, and then there will be two other sections that will contain the actual tests themselves, which I have started to add a folder structure here, so you can see that there are a few example tests that are included, and there are also some tests for testing general systems in the game itself. So before I jump into the details of the framework, let's look at one of these examples. So as an example for these, I went through and wrote up some tests for Stormtrooper and Rebel Trooper, and TIE Fighter and X-Wing, just so that we have both a ground and a space example, and we have light and dark examples for both sides. So in these tests, there's going to be some standardized stuff that you're going to see, and for the most part, I kind of expect people to just copy paste one of these examples and then edit it, rather than type it all out yourself. So let me go over what these pieces are. So the most important part here is this virtual table scenario. This tool is a big old class that has dozens, if not hundreds of functions in it that is all about setting up a table for you digitally, virtually, without needing to open up Gemp. So this will start at the table, start at the game, and then give you a whole bunch of helper functions for stepping through the functionality that normally you would do in the client. So it'll have features for, or functions for, if you're going to click on a card to deploy it, it will have a helper function for deploying cards. It will have helper functions for doing any action that you might be able to do in the game. And then on top of that, it will have helper functions for you to cheat. Because when you are doing testing, oftentimes you don't actually care about most of what you're doing. You're just trying to get all the way up to this one particular interaction with these three particular cards on the table. And so rather than make you play through all those steps all the time, this scenario is going to give you the ability to just put things on the table and arrange them. So the two major things that you have to worry about when you are setting up a test scenario is the actual decks that you are going to be giving each player. So up here is the light side and down here is the dark side. And so all you're going to be doing is you're going to be defining what cards specifically go into that deck. You hand it the blueprint ID, and then you give it a user-friendly name. This is what you're going to be referring to it later with, so that you can come back and pull it up. And this way you don't have to be trying to figure out which particular blueprint is that again. And actually, let me switch to the Stormtrooper.
Question?
Yeah, sure.
I apologize. Might just be doing something wrong. Or should we be seeing your screen? It might just be me.
Oh, yeah. So on Discord there is a if you see that little live button next to my name, you should be able to hover over that, and then there will be view stream.
Thank you.
Awesome. And then you can pop that out of Discord if you want to have a full screen experience with that. But anyway, so yeah, so you will assign user-friendly names. These are essentially variables, right, for the particular cards that you want to include. So for the Stormtrooper case, we are including an actual Stormtrooper, but then we're also including Admiral Mati and Admiral Chirano that will be used here to test the game text for the Stormtrooper. However, as we all know with Star Wars, you actually have to have more cards than the ones that you are actually playing with, because otherwise you'll lose when your life force is detected to have been depleted. So there's already a system in place for you to just say, I want this many cards in my deck. And so by default, this shows up as 10. So each player is going to have 10 cards slotted into their deck automatically by the system. By default, that it's Rebel Troopers and Stormtroopers that are going to be put in. And so you can effectively ignore those cards and just deal with the ones that you put into your test scenario. There's also some other settings here that we have a default ground location that both sides are going to have, and the test rig itself is going to go through that process of starting the game, putting down your starting location, handle all that stuff for you, so that while you're writing your test, you don't have to be worrying about really basic stuff like that. And then there's also some placeholders for including stuff like starting interrupts and shields. I don't actually have the code to support these yet, but they are here to show, just to be as kind of a starting point if anybody does end up adding that feature. So if you end up repeatedly finding yourself wanting to have an objective or something, this would be where you could set that up. You would just set up another hash map here and say, yeah, these are the starters I want, and then someone will have to write the code to handle those automatically. But anyway, so I'm going to skip past that first part, and then I'm gonna come down to one of these tests, and we'll take a look at how you actually use this. So first, we're going to get our scenario. This is just going to call that function that was up at the top that we were just looking at. And then you'll have this SCN object. I sometimes refer to it in my head as scene or scenario. Both are accurate for what you're doing. So the very first thing that you're going to be doing in each of your tests is you are going to be making actual Java variables for the cards that you referenced earlier. And so now we're going to say, I want to get the dark side card that's called Stormtrooper, and now we can assign that to a variable. This is going to be an actual physical card that we'll be manipulating. And then we can outrageously cheat and we can move stuff around. So I'm going to just directly put that Stormtrooper into my hand. I could put it on the table. I could put it on the support area, or whatever the side of the table is called in Star Wars. Do whatever it is that you need to get things arranged. So in this particular case, since we are just testing the absolute basic functionality of it deploys for one force when you put it down, we only need to have the one card basically in our hand. So after you have pulled all of your functions, you're then going to tell it to start the game. And if we just hop into this real quick, you'll see that there are some familiar actions that you may have seen if you played on Gemp. You'll see that both players are going to be asked, to select OK, and so we are going to be manually sending that decision to the server, saying that OK, Darkside decided that this time that they clicked on OK, right? And then we're going to have Lightside do the same thing, and then there's going to be that initial decision of choosing the starting location, and we're going to have Darkside put down their starting location and Lightside put down theirs. And so this is like I mentioned, this is kind of, or maybe I actually didn't say it on the stream yet. This test framework is almost like a headless client, right? It's almost exactly like a replacement for you being in the browser. So it's going to be able to do all these same decisions that you would normally do in the browser itself. And then also as a convention, I find that it is unhelpful to have that starting hand usually. So most of the time what I have it set up to do is that we let you, the tester, stack whatever you want in your hand, and then after you've drawn your hand, the test rig is automatically going to take all those extra cards that you didn't put there and just put them right back. Because it's just one more variable, right? One more confounding thing. You don't know if you've drawn a card that's going to get in the way. So we just clear it all back out so that you're dealing with as clean a testing setup as you possibly can. I clicked onto the wrong one. Okay. All right, so after you have started the game, we're now at the point where it should be the dark side player's first activate phase. And so at this point, now we're actually going to be playing the game normally. You can still cheat at this point if you find yourself in a situation where you just need to teleport a card from one zone to another. You can do that. But most of the time, after you've started the game, most of your actions are going to be legitimate, actual actions. And there's going to be a lot of helper functions that exist for very canned responses. For instance, this activate max force and pass. This goes through all of the particular decisions that need to be done so that you say, yeah, I want to activate the 3 force that are here. My opponent passes against responding to any of those 3 force. All that stuff just gets handled, right? Because from the perspective of your test, you just care about the fact that you've activated force, right? And then here, since we found ourselves past the activation phase, that particular helper function will have gotten us past that. We're now in the action phase, or sorry, in the control phase. And so since we're looking at something that involves deployment, we're going to be passing past the control actions. And so this particular function is extremely simple. All it is going to be doing is it is going to be having the current player pass and then the other player pass, plain and simple. And even though this particular thing is going to be happening a lot, rather than have you write pass responses everywhere, there's going to be these wrapper functions that are just to communicate a little more clearly to the other people that are reading your test, what is it that I'm doing? I'm not just passing actions. This is where we're at the control phase and we have both top level actions being offered to both players. I want both players to pass their control actions specifically. And so lots and lots of this framework is just very simple wrappers like that to help communicate your intent without needing to put a whole bunch of comments in here. And so now we get to the point where we start to actually check things. So JUnit, which is the basic unit test framework that is included here, has a bunch of assertion functions, and this is just a standard Java thing. So we are going to assert that these two things are the same. We're going to ask the scenario, what is the current phase? And then we're going to check and make sure that that phase is deploy. And so this is just, not only is this communicating to other people reading the test that, okay, we've now gotten ourselves to the deployment phase and we are sure that we're here, you're also kind of, covering your own butt and making sure that you didn't mess up on the way here. You got to the point where our test is now actually going to start in earnest, and you want to make sure that you haven't messed up and, oh no, we're actually in the draw phase, and then things will start, not making sense, right? So so now that we've asserted that we're in the deploy phase, we're also going to check and make sure that the dark side player has a deployment action, right? That we're not stuck in a response or something like that. And so now we're going to check that the dark side player has a decision available with this specific text: choose deploy action or pass. We know that we're at a point where you should be looking at your hand. All your deploy actions are highlighted, right? And this is going to just verify that we're at that point. We're also going to, sorry, go ahead.
So if, let's say at any point, any one of these asserts fails, does that basically just mean the test is a failure?
Correct, yeah. So let me change this real quick, and I'm going to change it to assert false and then run it. And what we will see here is that if I have made a false assumption in my test, and I attempt to run it, and once it goes through the process of recompiling and redoing everything, we're going to find that test fails, and it helpfully highlights exactly on the line that it failed at. And so this is really just, most of this actually wouldn't necessarily be required once you really get your feet underneath you, but because you're playing Gemp without any visuals, it may be difficult to do everything in the order that Gemp is expecting. Because there's a lot of stuff that Gemp does automatically for you that is no longer being done automatically here, so you need to make sure that you're doing it blind properly.
Yeah, actually, sorry, just one more, and then I'll shut up. So like an example of the fact that you're doing things that you don't normally have to think about is when you pass those control actions. I think most players are used to the game just skips the control phase for you. Yep.
Yeah, and that's something that is handled by the client, and since we have replaced the client, that's not being handled by us automatically anymore. So we have to be the ones as the tester to do that. Does someone else have a question? Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I assume those asserts still have value even after the test is working as expected, because if down the road somebody adds in some extra dialogue some part of the normal cycle, you'll get flagged.
Yes, exactly. So that is actually one of the best parts about having a test framework like this, is that when you are meticulous about deciding how things are supposed to go, this gives you the ability to later on go in and alter what those systems do, with the assurity that if something goes wrong, if you have totally broken the decision process, so it no longer asks you about top-level actions, all your tests are going to fail, not because they were testing top-level actions, but because we happened to be checking for them. Yeah, this is absolutely one of the best parts about having a big unit test suite. Okay, and then I'll switch that back and oops, not debug, but whatever. Okay, so now that we've made sure that we're in the deployment action, we're also going to double check and make sure that the Stormtrooper is actually in our hand. We did this manually earlier, but sometimes you can have effects that happen automatically that maybe discarded something from your hand and maybe you skipped past it because you were just passing a bunch of things and didn't realize it was going to happen. So there are some custom assertions that I've also written that allow you to just do a real quick check that we do still have that in hand, right? And no other game function messed us up. And then since we are doing something that has to do with deployment, you have to pay deployment out of your force pile. So earlier up here, we made sure that the maximum amount of force went into the force pile, but we want to make sure that that is still the case. Again, that nothing else, no other game effect that we overlooked affected what we're looking for here. So the two sites that are included by default for the ground versions are both. In fact, I can just double check real quick what exactly those are. So those are Tatooine Marketplace and Cloud City Chasm Walkway. These were both chosen to be as uncomplicated as possible. They don't have modifiers, right? So there's nothing on these cards says something like your cards deploy -1 or something like that, because that would really screw up your tests. They're all activated actions that you have to intentionally do, which we can always just ignore, so they effectively don't have any text on them most of the time, right? And they both have one lightsaber icon for both light side and dark side. So between those two things, we now have ourselves a consistent setup that all these tests can assume is going to be there, that you're going to have that 3 force activatable, one from each site and then one for yourself, right? On both sides. So it's as vanilla as possible. Anyway.
Now, we needed to,
go ahead.
We needed just a card that had a deploy cost that was greater than 10. You'd have to go back and set what the default force is.
So actually, you would probably in that case have to go in and really just add a whole bunch of extra locations or something like that. Or if there's a card that modifies the amount of force that you have, you would arrange the table so that it looks like a situation you could actually deploy that 10 cost card in.
And increase the filler count, right?
Sure. Yeah. You could. You could definitely do that. Or one of the things you could also do in a circumstance like that is you could just cheat, right? We don't actually need lightsaber icons. We could come over here and we could say move cards to force to top of force pile. And so you could get a bunch of cards, just pull a bunch of cards out of the reserve deck directly and then just stick them up there. Like this allows you to tackle that however you need to. It really just depends on how you want to set up your test, right?
Okay.
So anyway, so now that we have made sure that everything about this circumstance is legit, right? We have ourselves, or I've gotten lost again. Okay, so we have ourselves 3 cards in the force pile. We have ourselves a Stormtrooper in hand. We should be able to deploy that Stormtrooper. So now we're going to use this helper function, dark side, deploy card, and pass responses. This uses legitimate actual game actions. So first it's going to check and make sure, it's going to decide. It's going to tell the server, Darkside has decided that it wants to use the deploy action of this card, right? So it's wrapped all this functionality in there, but then it's also going to double check and make sure that you get asked, where am I going to deploy it? And so we have to provide that in the function, that you have to tell it which site it's going to get deployed to. And then we're also going to pass automatically the responses that your opponent has for using the force, and also the responses for actually playing the card. Because for the purposes of our test, we don't care about the fact that there are all those responses. So now we performed this game action, and now we have to double check and make sure that everything that we expected happened automatically. We're going to double check and make sure that Stormtrooper is at this location. And then we're going to double check and make sure that the force pile count has gone from 3 to 2, because Stormtrooper has a deploy cost of 1. So that is a very basic version of what this allows you to do, is actually play the game and then just make sure that everything plays out the way that it's supposed to. One of these tests that I skipped over that I'm going to go over right now is a convention that I have found to be very useful in Lord of the Rings. So that when I'm testing a card, the very first test that I do is going to cover all of the static information about the card, all the stats, all the icons, all the the game text, everything about it. So first I'll put together a comment that includes all that information, which then becomes very useful later when I'm trying to remember what was exactly on there. I don't have to switch back over to ScompLink or something. I can just reference up here what exactly I'm going to be changing. And then in our scenario, we're going to, again, get that dark side card, and then we're also going to get its blueprint, because we don't care about the physical incarnation of the card in this case. We just care about the blueprint. And so then we're just going to come in here and do a whole bunch of assertions about all the things about that card. We make sure that the destiny is 1, that the deploy cost is 1, that the forfeit is 2, and so on and so forth. In Lord of the Rings, we actually have a system that will spit out these tests for us automatically from a spreadsheet. And it may be worthwhile in the future looking to do something similar, looking at the JSON that you guys have in Star Wars, to just generate classes for, one class per card with all of these stats being double checked automatically. That is one of the reasons why the Lord of the Rings has so many tests. We have 4,700 at the moment, but 3,200 of those are just this, where it's just checking to see, are all the stats on this card actually correct. There was something I was gonna... it's already out of my head. Okay, so just to show then how we're gonna test the game text, the Stormtrooper says it deploys free to the same site as one of your Imperials with ability greater than 2. So in my deck over here, I have included a couple of examples. I have Admiral Motti, who has ability of 3, and I have Admiral Shirano, who has an ability of 2. And so what we're gonna test, we're gonna test both a positive and a negative situation. So we're going to check and make sure that it still deploys for 1 when there's an ability 2 Imperial, so that Admiral Shirano. We're going to grab references to both the Stormtrooper and Shirano. We're going to put both of them in hand. And then we're going to... Okay, so one of the caveats with Star Wars is the fact that the starting locations are not on the table until you've already begun the game. So even though I want to cheat Shirano onto the table, I have to wait until after the game is started so that the starting location, the dark side starting location, is now on the table. I could handle that myself manually, but in these earlier tests, I did not yet have that functionality, so it wasn't coded in yet. So we are going to use this helper function that moves cards to location, Shirano to the site. So all it does is it takes that and it slaps it into that zone, puts it on the table without actually deploying it. So you may see a lot of these functions that say move cards. That has nothing to do with the move phase. If you move cards to a site, move cards to hand, move cards to table, those are all about shifting the physical position of the card to cheat it into the position we want. And then we've also got some helper functions that are even more advanced than what we had before. This skip to phase is going to allow us to go directly to a particular phase that we care about. So it's going to automatically activate the maximum force, and then it's going to continually pass through all phases until we're at deploy. So we no longer have to actually worry about doing all those manually passes. So now we are at the situation that we were at before, with fewer function calls than we had to do before. We're going to double check and make sure the Stormtrooper is in our hand. We're going to double check and make sure that Shirano is still at the location. And then, just to be absolutely clear, in this case, we are going to compare Shirano's ability and make sure that it is 2. And then we once again check to make sure that our force pile count is 3.
What's Epsilon?
Okay, so for whatever reason, in the Star Wars CCG, y'all have defined all stats as floats and not ints. And so that means that you have to take into account the potentiality of a floating point error. So you can't just do a direct one-to-one comparison of this guy's ability to 2. So instead, when you're doing floating points, you have to basically say, we're only going to check up to this level of accuracy, to this level of precision. So if the difference between those two is smaller than this, then we're going to count it as even. So yeah, that was a little bit of an annoyance that I had to run into, but
just blame it on Brainiac.
Yeah, Brainiac would make sense, but it seems like it was kind of infectious and it applied to every single stat, not just the one that the Brainiac would have affected. Like deploy cost.
Pretty much every stat has some kind of card where there's a float.
I see. Okay. Well, at any rate, so that is really just that's the way that the card base is set up. So whenever we do a numeric comparison, most of the time we're going to have to slap Epsilon on here. Now there's some cases, like obviously you cannot have 1.1 cards in your force pile count, so that happens to be an int. There's also a good number of the helper functions that coerce the stats into ints just to get rid of that annoyance, but maybe there will be situations where that ends up not being good later, but we'll see. So anyway, so other than that, this is going to be exactly the same as the previous test. We are putting the Stormtrooper down onto the site, and then we are double checking to make sure that it landed, and that we have in fact gone from 3 cards in the force pile to 2, because 2 ability was not enough to trigger the game text. And so now finally we get to a point where we are actually going to be having the positive case of that Stormtrooper. So we're going to put Admiral Mahdi on the table. This is going to look pretty much copy pasted from the previous one, but we're going to have Mahdi instead of the other Admiral. We once again cheat to put Mahdi on the table. We once again skip to the deploy phase, and then we double check and make sure that the ability here is 3. Now this particular kind of check here is not really because I'm worried about the fact that Mahdi might have had his ability changed, although that could happen if you have 5 or 10 cards on the table and something is boosting ability, right? This is really more of a documentation, right? This is communicating to future testers that this is what I care about, right? Is the fact that he has ability, not that he is anything else. And then this time when we deploy our Stormtrooper to the site, we now see that the force pile amount has stayed the same on both sides of this operation. So our Stormtrooper has successfully deployed for free. All right, so any questions on this before I move on into a little more deeper?
Can you go back? Let's go to that test you were just on. Sorry.
Sure.
Just back right when you first get the card for Mahdi, just a question that popped into my head. If you could scroll up and drop. So when you say like get card Mahdi, can you just explain again, like, let's say you had like 3 Mahdis in your deck. Is it getting all 3 of them? Is it getting one at random? Is this not like a valid question that I'm asking? What is happening there?
So what this is going to be doing is it's actually going to be looking for a reference in this dictionary specifically, this map. And because of the way that maps are set up in Java, you cannot have a card with a duplicate key. So you'll see here that it's highlighted because it's noticed that we've attempted to insert the same card name in here twice. If you had a test situation where you did in fact have 3 copies of Mahdi, you would need to go through and call them Mahdi 1, Mahdi 2, Mahdi 3, and then make sure that you are pulling the specific one in your test. Does that make sense?
But sorry, I still have a question. I'm actually still confused. So let's continue that line of thought. So let's go ahead and say we have 2 Mahdis in the deck. So go ahead and show me what that would look like again.
Sure. So you would end up with a Mahdi 2 and a Mahdi 1.
So do those refer to 2 different cards? Because
Yes.
they both just say 1/164. How does it know that one of them is Mahdi 1 and one of them is Mahdi 2?
So when the game starts up, it is going to go through a process of cycling through all the cards that are in your reserve deck, and it's going to be assigning them in an internal dictionary, just like this. It's going to grab a physical version of Mahdi and say, okay, you are now Mahdi 1, and grab a second physical copy of Mahdi and say, okay, you are Mahdi 2. Now, it happens to just take the first one that it can find, right?
Okay, that answers it.
Right, yeah. But then, yes, so for the purposes of your test, you can normally just not have to worry about that. That is one of the things that the test framework takes care of. So all you need to do is make sure that your names here are consistent.
I think someone else had a question.
Yeah, so I was kind of answering my one. So if you were trying to test, hey, son of Skywalker and let's say daughter of Skywalker, and you wanted to test all the different personas of Leia, you've got different card IDs, but you don't want to name them with Leia as the same variable. You can't make
precisely. And in fact, in one of the captive tests here, I have that exact situation where I'm testing different personas, and so you just need to give them different names. So I have Chewie here.
So both are Chewbacca, but one's Protector, one is just Chewie.
Right.
Got it.
Yeah. So
then if you had a card where if you have multiple versions of that card, they stack and compile onto each other for like cumulative effects. You would have like Trooper 1, Trooper 2, Trooper 3, but they would all have the same blueprint ID.
Right, exactly. And then you would have to keep them separate in your own code, in your test code.
Okay.
Yeah, and those strings are just kind of shorthand abbreviations to use for clarity, right?
Exactly. Yeah, you can name these whatever you want, whatever happens to be useful. And in fact, in some cases, like I did happen to put the card titles here, but I could have just said ability to Imperial if that's really all that I was caring about. The one thing that I try to do is, although you can put anything in here, I do try to make sure that whatever I put in here works as a variable name, because very frequently when I'm starting out a new test, I will do something like this, get DS card, and then I can just give it that same ID. Whereas if I had instead put these as dashes, that is not a valid variable name. So if I attempted to do that here, I would screw myself up, right? It's not legal. But yeah, other than that, sky's the limit. Like you can, and in fact, you don't have to necessarily keep them variable name legal. You could pick whatever you want, but then that just means that you're going to end up with, var something equals something else, and that could be a little confusing to yourself, making it more complicated than it needs to be. But okay, so that's it for a basic test on Stormtrooper. Now, so like I mentioned, we also have. Why is there a change here?
Can I ask a question before you move on too much?
Sure.
If you go back to the general being, so you asserted in your Stormtrooper test just a few cards out of the 10 card deck.
Mm-hmm.
So, what happens if you were to draw cards, right? Because you've asserted only 3 cards. You haven't said which cards are which cards. Can you draw blank cards, or how does that work?
So the filler that we're putting in are actual cards, right? So it's going to be 10 Stormtroopers and 10 Rebel Troopers being stuck into people's decks. And
those are in addition, right, to the 3 that you've manually specified.
Yeah. So here, in fact, I can hop into this real quick into the constructor. So there's going to be the filler count that is handled. We're just going to go in and look at the default light side, default dark side fillers, and we're going to be assigning them filler 1, filler 2, filler 3, filler 4 names and sticking them into the reserve deck. So yeah, like that's that. If you do end up drawing cards, one way that you could distinguish cards that you just drew versus cards that you had already placed there is you could try to look for the ones that are called filler. But most of the time, I find that just looking at the counts is all you have to worry about. Like, we don't actually care that I drew this specific card. We care about the fact that I drew 3 cards, right? So that's why in these tests, rather than trying to look at the specifics, I just say, get me the count. And there's going to be helpers for all of the different piles in here. There's the dark side reserve deck, light side reserve deck. There's hand counts in here, force pile, use pile, everything's in here. So I would just rely on counts if you're ever doing drawing or anything like that. And then just to sort of demonstrate how you can manipulate these a little bit. So those other ones had the ground space systems, but when we're testing TIE fighters and X-Wings, of course, you don't really want to do that. So instead, we have these space systems by default, Dantooine and Tibrin, which we're once again trying to be as unassuming and passive as possible with one lightsaber apiece. So the TIE fighter is going to look extremely similar. We don't need to go nearly as much into detail, but we have another one that just checks to make sure that it deploys properly by itself, and that it deploys for 0 if you have an Imperial capital starship. So we have a Star Destroyer that we have defined. We put it into play. We make sure that it plays for free. Same sort of deal. Oh, and then also, so here we're also checking to make sure that it has ability 1 from its permanent pilot. So that's part of the game text, right? Not the stats. So we just plop that into place, and then we double check and we make sure it doesn't in fact get Battle Destiny, and we ensure that it does. All right, so let me go over the structure of the framework here a little bit. So we've talked a lot about the virtual table scenario. This is the main object that you will be dealing with. All the functions that sit here in this object are going to be about manipulating the table. So we want to be able to start the game. We want to be able to communicate that a player has made a particular decision. All that stuff is here in this particular object. Now, in Lord of the Rings, when I first started bringing this over, this was a massive 1,500 line monstrosity that just had a whole bunch of wrapper functions. But while I was converting it to Star Wars, I stumbled on a way to actually chop it up into pieces. If this was C#, I would have used partial classes, but Java doesn't have partial classes. But what they do have is they have interfaces with default implementations. So I was able to take the virtual table scenario and make it inherit from a whole bunch of these interfaces that aren't technically interfaces. They actually have default implementations of every single function, just so that it's in multiple files and you can kind of see what these are about, right? So we have the test base that is mostly going to be concerned with having all those specific references to specific cards that are going to be useful, and you can also expand these if it turns out that there's a particular default arrangement that it makes sense to refer to in a lot of different tests. Then just add it here and reference it in the particular test. I mentioned before the starters and the shields. We have a blank version up here, but if it turns out that you end up writing a whole bunch of tests with bring him before me, maybe it makes sense to come in here and make a default bring him before me objective default here. And then all of these are going to be, like I mentioned, chopped up based on functionality. So there's one here that has to do with battles. This is going to have all sorts of helper functions for double checking things. Can you initiate? It's going to be looking for the initiate battle decision that has been handed to that particular character, or sorry, to that particular player. The DS initiate battle here is going to actually be executing the action of initiating the battle when that is a valid option. So it's going to communicate to the server we want to be choosing that initiate battle action. Kind of stepping back a minute to a bit of a higher level concept, a decision in this framework is referring to any time that the game is asking the player to do something, whether it's choose a card from your hand, whether it is picking a number, whether it's doing nothing but giving you the option to pass. Like, that is going to be a decision. And so for the most part, everything that you find here in decisions is going to be giving you some way to understand what decision is currently there, or executing one particular branch of a decision. A choice is going to be one of the things that you are offered in a decision, right? So there's all sorts of things it might be. It might be highlighting 4 or 5 different active cards on the table for you to choose. It might be highlighting cards in your hand for you to select. All of those individual options are referred to as choices here. And so this particular interface is going to be giving you lots of different ways to interact and manipulate those choices. So for instance, if you were being told that you need to choose a card on the table to forfeit, you can say Darkside is going to choose this particular card. And so that way you don't have to be fumbling about with the decision framework or anything like that. It's just a straightforward game action as opposed to a server action, right? Actions are similar, but actions are a top level thing that you do, right? So if you're in the deploy phase like we looked at, you might want to deploy a card. This is at its core just making a decision, right? But we wrapped it here so that you have the ability to communicate a little better what exactly it is that you're doing in your test. So card properties, this one's pretty straightforward. It's going to be looking for things about the card. So if I want to get the modified land speed or hyperspeed, and I don't care about what's printed on the card, I care about the absolute value that it's been given based on the game state. Maybe there's other cards that have impacted that. There's going to be helpers for all sorts of these stats. But I am certain that this is not an exhaustive list, so you may find yourself in a situation where you need to be testing that particular thing. Just feel free to come in here and add another helper function that does whatever's similar to what you see here. You should pretty much be able to copy paste it and then just change whatever this calling function is.
So if we were
go ahead.
Site, would we need to build that into the test base?
I'm sorry, say that again.
So if we want to test a specific site that we were building, do we have to put that into the test base, or do we want that to be a card that gets pulled as part of a test?
So if you're testing a particular site, then that is probably going to be put into the deck as an item. And in fact, let me let me hop over to the force drain test where we did just that. You can put a location into your deck just like you do anything else, and then you can cheat it onto the table if you need to. There's a helper function for that, move location to table, where we'll actually put it into the proper sector and handle all that stuff for you. Or you can play it as a deployment action, right? If you feel unfamiliar with the particular actions in here, and you just want to follow the game process that would normally put that location there on the table. Both of those are valid ways of doing that. Okay. Ad-hoc effects we will actually be going over because I ended up needing this for one of the things. Ad-hoc effects are for well, most of the tests that we do, because there's such a large implemented card pool, if you're familiar with the Star Wars CCG, you can just think of a card that does such and such a thing and include it. But sometimes there is no card that does what you're looking to do. This will often come up when you are adding new mechanics, for instance. And so these will allow you to sort of staple concepts onto an existing card. So if there's a modifier that I really want to be on the table, I can just staple it onto the game state without needing to play a card that actually has that modifier. I can do the same thing with top-level actions. I can execute an effect that theoretically would have had to have been on a card, but rather than actually make a card that has that effect, I can just instead directly manipulate the game to make that happen. Like I said, we're going to go over this one in a little bit more detail because I actually had to do it for one of the tests, and so we'll get to see these in action. But so these are cheating even more than just putting cards on table, right? These are Frankensteining new cards just for the purposes of a particular test. So that may come in handy if you end up in a particularly fraught edge case. Let's see. So just going down here, game procedures. This is going to refer to most of the time it has to do with passing, right? Because there's a lot of passing in this game. So there's all sorts of helper functions for doing the pass in a way that communicates to other people reading your code what exactly it is that you're doing. You've also got certain checks that you can do in here. Like for instance, you may notice that there's escape and capture decisions in here because surprise, surprise, I was doing that a lot with Captive Fury. So you can just wrap up a decision being available that has this particular text, just so that you can refer to that in one line instead of having to throw a bunch of strings everywhere. Game properties is going to be looking at the game state itself. So for instance, if you're trying to get the reference to a particular player, if you're trying to get stats about the game, like how much force drain is currently being executed in a particular force drain, are we currently in a battle, just asking the game state, what exactly do I see on the table? What's one player's life force remaining? All that kind of stuff is in here. We also have a pile properties that is very similar, which is where you're going to be looking at the properties of a particular pile. How many cards does it have? There's helpers in here for you to just grab the entire list. If you just want to grab every single reference to every card that's in the hand and do something with it, you can do that. There's helper functions for that for all of them. You can there's helper functions here for getting the top card of any particular deck. So if you want to inspect that before you do something, you can do so and cheat around. And then zone manipulation here, just like it sounds, this is the place where you are going to be directly scooting cards around on the table. So if I just want to directly attach a card to someone, I can do that. If I want to directly stack a card on someone, I can do that. Yeah, so this is just going to be a lot of moving stuff around. I want to directly move this card to the side of the table. I want to directly move this card to a particular location so it's in game and at that location. We saw that earlier when we were doing that with Stormtroopers. So, long story short, lots and lots and lots of helper functions, all really designed to wrap up the kind of tedious functionality that you have to play the game without you needing to copy paste the same 5 or 6 lines everywhere, right? So that's that's it. Any questions about this before we move on?
All good.
Awesome. So that's number 1. We've gotten through all that. That is the test rig. It's not complete. It does not do literally everything you can do in the Star Wars CCG, simply because I did not personally run into every single feature. So this will have to be expanded as time goes on. But now at least you should have enough of an overview to get a bit of a grasp on it.
I guess maybe I have a question. I don't want to totally derail because this could turn into a long discussion. What would be like? Basically, I think I understand everything you showed, but like how I would set this up, like on my machine, is that like that's probably like a whole discussion or tutorial?
Oh, you know what? Actually, no. That I should go over that actually. So once this has been merged in, this is just going to be in the code base, right?
Okay.
So when you pull it down, it will be in Gemp here on the server in the test section. So yeah, let's actually go through how to execute any of this stuff. So what I'm
on that topic, do all tests run every time you compile, or can you selectively turn groups of them off for speed reasons?
You could, in theory, turn it off. However, I don't think you have anything to worry about with speed. We have 4,700 tests, and it took 51 seconds for me to run it. Like, it's until you get to that point, you probably don't have anything to worry about. And most of the actual delay comes from a one-time startup. So if I run all these 69 tests, I think that we have, the first one will take a moment to get the whole test rig up, and then each one will run in milliseconds.
And during development, you're just going to be probably right-click running specific tests or a specific group of tests, not the whole recompile anyway, right?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, exactly. So this is in IntelliJ IDEA. I would highly recommend that if you're doing development, you do it in here. I know that there's some grognards that like to do it with, just a text editor and command line. But especially with these tests, and especially with the debugging that I'll show in a moment, you really want to have an IDE on your side. So what I did a moment ago here was I just right-clicked on this particular folder, and I went down to run all tests, and we saw that it was a pretty snappy process. It double-checked that it didn't need to recompile anything, and then and in fact, if you have changed some code about your system, it's going to recompile all of Gemp, and then it'll run all of your tests. And as you can see, it's a pretty snappy process. You can also run just any one of these individual subfolders, and you can also just run any individual test. You can come in, like, so for instance, if you're in the middle of writing this test, I can come in and just right-click in the function and say run, and that will run just that one function. I can also do something similar for the entire class. If I want to make sure that I haven't broken anything for my Rebel Trooper code as a whole, I could right-click outside of any function, and that will run all those tests for that particular card that we have there. This is the primary way that I interact with it. Like, yes, of course, they're going to be running at the end of every compile. If you find yourself in a situation where there's a test that's stopping you, and you really know that, I'm not turning this off permanently, I just need to get it disabled temporarily, I often will just go out and comment out the test marker here, and then it will not be visible to the test runner. And so if we come in here and run these again, we'll see that there's only 3 tests now instead of 4, because it has lost the marker that told it that this is a test that it needs to run.
Well, before we move on to the next section, I had a couple questions, and once again, I don't want to derail things too much either, but is there a way to set up a virtual table scenario and then migrate it over to an actual table where you can turn it over to player control?
There is not. That is an interesting feature that you could, in theory, do, I think, because we are, in fact...
What I'm thinking is like setting up a tutorial where, let's say you want to learn how weapons work, and you can pre-script, automatically set up a scene, and then put the player in and have them, go through a few scripted steps or that sort of thing.
So that is actually a system. That is a system I have been thinking in the back of my head how to build. I think it would probably be built off of replays rather than anything programmatic in here. But that is, however, totally outside the scope of what we're doing in the here. Yeah. But it probably would involve something similar, right? Where you have some way of defining a series of actions that is being performed in a particular scenario. But yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and I can imagine something similar for, like, if you wanted to have some pre-constructed Hoth scenario where you wanted to pre-set up,
right,
20, 30 cards and then put players in. Right. Something similar.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, there's definitely value to that, but it's not a system that exists yet, unfortunately. So I also want to show off before we move on. Actually, I do want to show off one of the major killer functions of this is the ability to step into a card with the debugger. So if you're unfamiliar with debugging, here in the ID, I can come in here and I can click anywhere on the gutter here and highlight a particular line that communicates to the program that I want it to stop at a particular point. And so here, instead of hitting run, I told it to go debug. And when it does that, it's going to execute the test all the way up until the point where I have given it a breakpoint, and then it's going to stop. And this is incredibly powerful because now I can inspect the game state specifically to try and figure out what's going on. So in the scene, there are references to the game state, the game, and the user feedback, all of which you can see I've pinned them to the top. You can do that with any particular one of these items by right-clicking and then going to add to watches, and that will add it up there to the top. But so here I can look at the game state and we can try to inspect what exactly is going on. What is it doing? I have the last messages here that is what shows up in chat, right? So I can make sure that okay, nothing jumped in and tried to do a weird response that I was totally unexpecting. I can also look at the awaiting decision map and try to figure out, okay, what is Gemp actually waiting on? So right now, the light side player has been asked to choose an activate action or pass. So that is the specific point that we're at. If I'm really confused about what might be available to them, I can take a look in here and see all of the parameters that are associated with that particular decision. Right now, it's being asked to activate force. And so this can be an incredible debugging tool for debugging your own tests, but it's also really, really useful for debugging the card itself that you are developing, because now you can arrange the setup exactly the way that you want it to, and then we get to this deploy action, right? I can, so using the controls over here, you can tell it to step over one at a time, meaning that it just goes one step at a time, or I can come over here and I can hit resume. It will continue playing all the way up until it gets to that new breakpoint that I set, and now we can step into it. So now we're going to be doing this step into button where it will look at that particular function call and it will go to that function and continue stepping through. So we're gonna do the ls decided. This is going through all the different layers of the test reg itself, but now we're finally at the core here. So now we're going to be hopping back into the server at this point. We're going to be going to decision.decision made. And this has stepped into Gemp. We can now see this players play actions in order game process that we have stepped into. This is the particular part of the server that we are at. From here, the sky's the limit. You are in the middle of the Gemp code as it is running. If you are trying to figure something out, there is no way faster for you to get into the guts of Gemp and figure out why on earth is this dumb thing happening. If you are coding a particular card, like let me pull it. Title. Fury. I didn't have this up. So if you're coding a particular card and you're trying to figure something out, you can enter a breakpoint in that card's text or in that card's function and run your test, and it will hop up there. And in fact, we can do that, I believe, for the Stormtrooper that we have the tests for. Well, let's see what text it has. Okay, this is a little bit different because you're adding an always on modifier. So I could come over here and stop it. We want the Stormtrooper test that we did. So I'm going to add one here at the start game, and we're just going to hit debug. And because I put that breakpoint over in the card itself, now when we're at the point where Gemp is looking at all the cards and saying what modifiers in your game text should always be active, well, here you go. This is that point where it is being added in. And so you can inspect this, you can double check to make sure that all your variables look exactly the way that it's supposed to be. You can step into the filters as they are evaluated to try and make sure that everything is showing up properly. This is just an enormously powerful way of testing the internals of the system. Okay, so I think that's it for the overview. So now, unless there's any other pending questions, now is the time for us to start looking at the big boy here, Captive Fury.
I got one more question.
Sure.
So I saw a lot of positive testing on the like the stats for a card, are there, I don't know if this makes sense, but is there a way to like easily test that a Stormtrooper is not a leader, a gambler, all these other attributes?
So for the most part, that would just be an inversion of this. So right now, so like for this particular,
like, is there a way to check that only the card only has these 2 attributes and none of the other 50?
There's not an easy way to do that. You could in theory add a function that does that. That loops through all of the different values here, and we say that we want to make sure that it is not an accountant, right?
Right.
So this would work fine, and so I believe that you could totally add a function in the framework here somewhere that does exactly that, where you tell it, look at all the icons, look at all the keywords, and if it's anything but this, fail it. You could do that.
Got it. Okay. Maybe to put on the to-do list later.
Yeah, maybe. Okay, so if there's nothing else, we're going to do Captive Fury. So Captive Fury is one of the, 75, 77 cards that have not yet been implemented because of the complexity, or rather, it's not so much that this one is complex as it touches a system that is complex, that being battling. There's a lot of things that are already coded about battling, and this violates a lot of those assumptions. And so I implemented this card and wrote about 30 tests, which I used as I developed the card. And so we're going to go over all those tests in detail so we can see how exactly Captive Fury was set up here.
Does it make sense to develop tests for old cards, only new
Absolutely.
cards?
So the more tests that you have, the more resilient your system gets to changes. So if you had tests for 1,000 cards out of the card pool, especially like let's say that you sat down and you said that, okay, I want to rewrite the battle system because the way that it's written is not fantastic or whatever. If you have tests for 1,000 different cards that interact with the battle system that you know work properly, then when you go in to make changes to the battle system, you now have 1,000 data points for whether or not the thing that you did broke everything. So I think that it's extremely valuable to have tests here. Now, there is a certain practical element to how exactly, how much time are you willing to spend just writing tests for things that you know already work. My methodology is that whenever a bug is reported, for a particular card, I will often go in and write basic tests for all the normal aspects of that card while I am figuring out the bug. And many times I will even use these unit tests to be testing the particular bug, and arranging the table and then realizing that, oh yes, it's these 2 cards. When they're on the table, they don't play well together. And so then not only do you have the basic tests that I have added, you will also have or for that particular bugged card, you will also have the new bug circumstance already situated. And in fact, we had that exact thing happen for Captive Fury, but we'll get to that here in a moment. So Captive Fury, it's a used or lost interrupt. The used function just has you cancel the force drain from ITO from a specific card, but it's the lost one that is really the big one. During your battle phase, any of your escorted captives at the same site may initiate and participate in one battle. They may not use weapons or devices, and you may not voluntarily forfeit or relocate them. So one of the first things that I want to do when I sit down and try to test a particular card is I want to look at all those assumptions, all the aspects of the card that may need to be checked. So just setting the used part aside, let's look at lost. So first off, we're told that any of your escorted captives at the same site may initiate and participate in one battle. So we need to be able to check and make sure that an individual captive can be selected. We need to be able to make sure that multiple captives at the same site may be selected when you play this card. You also, since we know that there's a same site limitation here, we need to have a situation where there are multiple captives at multiple sites, and we cannot select them in a group that covers multiple sites, right? There's also these limitations here. They may not use weapons, they may not use devices, you may not voluntarily forfeit them, and you may not voluntarily relocate them. So there's 4 more situations that are coming up. You may not voluntarily forfeit also sort of implies that you can be forced to forfeit them if they are hit. So right off the bat, just by reading the text here, we can kind of sort of get in our mind several different situations that we're going to have to test. And it can be useful to write those down. Shoot, I did not open up the document. I want to open up that document real quick. VHD has been doing a lot of good work putting together a single document for tracking all the various issues with these particular cards. And so we have it
largely inherited stuff from what is it, EBT?
Yeah, he had a spreadsheet, and that was the basis of this. But there's also been a lot of good information added that was not there. Okay, so here on this particular page, I was writing out all the different test cases that we might possibly need. In addition to what is printed on the card, there was, of course, the advanced rules entry. When using this light side interrupt, the captive is temporarily placed on the light side of the site. So there's a test that we now need to check. It says even if enclosed. So there's something we need to check. We need to have a captive and an escort in an enclosed vehicle for us to look at that. This relocation does not count as being released. Okay, so now we need a card that triggers off of releases and makes sure that it does not get triggered at the time that we do that we play this card, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of individual things in here that actually made this very easy to write tests for, because I didn't have to sit here and think through all the situations. The AR entry had already done most of the work for me. And so we sat down and wrote out a whole bunch of these different things that have to be done while trying to think of what cards could be applied to this particular situation. And then once I had all those out, written out, I then came in, made this very basic test that once again did the checking all the stats and whatnot, and then I just went in and copy pasted a very basic function 20 or 30 times or however many it was, and renamed them all to match that particular thing that we were testing. So up here we can see that there are a whole lot more cards in these decks than there were in the toy examples. In every case, as I moved on to a new test, if there was a new card that we had to include, then we would just go in and I just added it up here. For the most part, it doesn't affect the test if that card happens to be languishing in the reserve deck. That doesn't actually affect what we're doing, so it's okay to have a whole bunch of stuff, a whole bunch of kitchen sink stuff thrown together here. So let's take a look at the most basic version of the test, where we're just looking at the ability to play the card and actually have the captive engage in battle. So we once again grab our Captive Fury card from the light side deck. We're also going to grab Chewie, who for all these tests, or almost all of them, Chewie is going to be the captive, and Boba Fett is going to be the escort. So we're grabbing the light side starting location, because that's where by default we're going to be doing our testing, so we need to deploy there. So after we've started the game, we're going to cheat and put Boba on that site, and then there's already a well, I had to develop this obviously for this, but there's a capture card with action here that is going to directly manipulate the game and tell Boba Fett to seize Chewie, and so that way I do not have to go through juggling. Do I want to have somebody, IG-88 with the riot gun or whatever? I just directly put it on there, because we don't care how he became captive. We just care that he is. And now this is another helper function. Skip to the light side turn, because this is a light side card that we're doing. We don't care about the dark side where we start. So we're going to skip to the light side turn, and then after I built that, I also continued developing it and made it so that it, after skipping, it also performs that skip to phase function, so that we don't have to start it, activate it, and then skip to a phase again. So once again, we are just as much as possible trying to eliminate actions that are not related to the thing that we're testing. So we get ourselves to the battle phase, and then we double check and make sure that the light side has a lost interrupt available that can be played. This particular helper function is used specifically because Captive Fury can be a used or a lost, right? And so you have to specify that we are looking for the lost functionality. And so if you drill down into that, you're going to see that it is checking to make sure that the actions are available tied to that particular card, but that have this text in there to distinguish it from the used function. And then we're just going to go ahead and play it. So we play the lost interrupt, and then because of the way that the card is designed, you have to select which card it is that you're going to be initiating battle at. We then double check and make sure that the next decision that we're doing is choosing the escorted captives to battle. We're going to choose Chewbacca, that is the one that we're targeting, and then we're going to pass the responses from Darkseid for playing the card and using the Force for that card. Although this one doesn't have a Force use, but whatever. And now
it sort of does. Well, I guess it depends on how you think of it, because it does charge you, like you do pay for the initiation of the battle.
That's right.
But that's not considered a cost of the interrupt. So I'm not sure how that.
So I think that might. Let me double check here.
I know when I tested it like the old-fashioned way as a player, and it used Force to initiate the battle, which is correct. So there's no error there, but I'm not sure how that shakes out in your test rig.
Well, so actually, I think that in this particular case, that's just kind of like it didn't care where that Force use came from. In our case, it wasn't because we used the interrupt. It was because we started battle.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, no, yeah, you're totally right. That must have been why I had this here. And it may actually make sense to put a comment here and say that this is for the Force used from battle or whatever, just to indicate that. But yeah. Okay, and then we get to so we have here the ability to just pass through the start responses, because there's cards that respond to everything, right? Now, one of the things that I did do when adding this was that I actually altered the way that responses work in the text. So now they actually include the specific event that they are responding to, and so that way I can write these tests in a way that will skip past just battle initiated responses and make it very laser focused, so that I'm not accidentally skipping past 10 different things that I actually care about, right? Okay, so now we find ourselves in a situation where we have played Captive Fury, we have targeted Chewie, and now we have a whole bunch of checks to do about this. First, we're going to assert that it is at the location. As you may recall, captives are normally not at the location, but for the duration of this battle, he's now there. So we need to make sure that he is, in fact, considered to be at the location for the purposes of the game. We're going to assert that he is not currently attached to Boba Fett. Okay? We're going to check and make sure that a battle has, in fact, actively started. And we are going to check and make sure that both Chewbacca and Boba Fett are participants in that battle. And then we're going to make sure, and just as one last little thing to make sure that there's not a response that we're hanging up on that could potentially affect things, we're going to double check and make sure that we're at the light side weapons segment, which really just kind of drills in that, okay, yes, our battle has begun. Yeah, so this is the basic case. This is just making sure that card operates on a very basic level, right? So let me close some of these. So here, I'm actually going to try and split this up on the other pane and see if that makes sense. No, not at this card. not at this text size. So, one of the things that you may see here is that there's a whole bunch of different effects, a whole bunch of different functions in here that were developed for the purposes of testing that card. And this is actually a much better example for demonstrating the debugging. So let me just hop into that real quick. So we have, for instance, this action here that is choose the escorted captives to battle. If I copy this and look over, we'll actually see that there's a specific part here that defines that particular action that we're checking for. So if I stick a breakpoint here, and then I right click in here and I go to debug, this will go through the entire game process as we had before, and then it will choose the site for us that we're going to initiate battle at, and then we will find ourselves, come on now, debug, maybe I hit run. I did do, invalid spot for a, that's why. So not every line of code is valid for stopping on, so I just didn't do it properly. So here we find ourselves stopped at the point where the action is defining this particular action. And so actually I'm going to move a breakpoint down here so we can see that one of the things that's being defined here is a response to the cards being targeted. Once Chewie has been selected, what happens? So I'm going to hit continue here, and now we can find ourselves that we're going to store those cards that were just used, because we're going to be using that in a later situation, right? If I move up the call stack here, all the way up to our Captive Fury test, we can see that this is actually the exact point that the test is currently executing. But that particular card text happened to be evaluated at this point after the light side had chosen Chewbacca, right? So once again, just sort of demonstrating that this is a very excellent way of stepping directly into a card's code if there's a particular aspect of it that is not working the way that you expect it to. Okay, so let's move on to the next test. So the next one, Captive Fury Captive cannot use weapons. So this is fairly straightforward. So now, in the exact same scenario that we had before, we're now going to add a bowcaster to the situation. Before we capture Chewie, we are going to attach that bowcaster directly to him. Again, we don't need to deal with deployment or anything like that. And then after Boba has captured him, he's now got both Chewie and Boba Fett. And in fact, let me just demonstrate looking at the game state a little bit here. So I'm going to open up a debug session after I have, I got debug points elsewhere in the code that I accidentally hit. So now we're just going to inspect the game state a little bit here. So let's take a look at, so in play, this is a list of all the cards that are currently in play. We can see that this particular card, number 43, has a blueprint, and if we open up that blueprint and inspect it, we can see that this is Chewie's bowcaster, right? So we can inspect some things about that card. We can see what it's attached to. We can double check that the card that it is attached to is in fact Chewbacca, right? Let's take a look at, I think this one is Chewie himself. Yeah, so this particular card is Chewie, so we can do some inspections on here. We can see what zone is he in. He's in the attached zone, because right now he is currently attached to Boba Fett because he's been made a captive, right? We can even take a look at the captive. It should have information on here for who is, there we go, escort. So here we can see that there's a reference to whatever card is currently escorting this captive, and we can see that this one is Boba Fett. So if at any time you find yourself in a situation where you don't have any threads to pull, just set a breakpoint once the game has started and just inspect it and see, is there anything that I missed? Or you can even just use this as a really simple check before you have written any of your tests to make sure that, yeah, that this did in fact go to the zone that I expected it to go in. Okay, but so we have verified that, so we play Captive Fury, we do that same old process before of choosing Chewie and targeting him, and then once we're in the battle, we verify that we are in fact in the weapons segment, but we verify that we do not have an action available of the bowcaster. And so I can once again just sort of demonstrate that. We're going to hit a breakpoint here, and we are going to double check the awaiting decisions. There should be an awaiting decision for the awaiting decision map here. The light side player is currently making a decision. The name of that decision is choose weapons segment action to play or pass, and if we look in the parameters, we see that there's nothing. There is not, in fact, any actual action that is available. All they're able to do in this case is pass. So actually, just to sort of demonstrate things a little more, I'm going to come over here to the card and we're going to manipulate it. So the reason why it's not able to use weapons is because we are adding this modifier for the duration of the battle. So I'm going to comment that out, and we're going to come over and debug here and sort of demonstrate what it looks like when you are changing a particular card as you or testing a card as you are developing it, right? So if we hop into this decision map, we should see that in the parameters there is in fact an action for firing Chewbacca's what is it? It's cut off. Fire Chewbacca's bowcaster. So that is a really easy way, you know, just to show that you can make your changes live. And then go in and run the test again and see if it worked. So here our test fails because we, you know, you're not supposed to have that, but now that we've changed the code back, once we run it, it should be running fine. Okay, Captive Fury Captive cannot use permanent weapons. So if a particular card, like for instance, we have the Hoth Han Solo, who has the built-in blaster rifle, heavy blaster rifle. We're basically going to repeat that exact same test and go through and make sure that even a guy that has a permanent weapon is not able to use it because of that particular text. Same sort of deal here. Captive Fury Captive cannot use devices. So here we've added an electro binoculars. We've done the exact same process of attaching the electro binoculars to Chewie, and then we have once again verified that at the appropriate stage, he's not allowed to use it at all. Cannot be voluntarily forfeit. So here we now have to actually have a legitimate battle with actual like interaction, right? We're not just skipping to a particular point. We actually have to play this battle out a little bit. And there's a bunch of helper functions that I've developed to make this as simple as possible. So first, we play through Captive Fury just like we did before. We're skipping past all of the actions that have to be performed. And then we need to make sure that we don't screw ourselves over by drawing the wrong destiny. Now that these tests are mature and they have a whole bunch of cards in here, who knows what's going to be on the top of the reserve deck, right? So we need to make sure that we are setting a very particular destiny on top. Now in the framework, one of the things that we have included here is there is actually a bit of a destiny library, a destiny pack I called it. So I went through and found 8 cards that give you all the destinies 0 to 7. And if there's more than that, I was unaware, so y'all could add more to these if you think those values would be useful. But so in the card test itself, you can come in and say prepare light side and dark side destinies, and all that's doing is it's going to be grabbing one of those destiny cards and moving it to the top of the reserve deck. You could have done that manually yourself, but once again, we're just trying to reduce as many aspects of the test that are not related to directly what you're doing.
And that card is already in the deck?
So
yeah, that's exactly my question.
So by default, at the very beginning of the scenario, I actually remove all those destiny cards from the game. So they have been put out of play. However, once you do this, once you prepare that particular destiny, that card has now been put into the game, right? So that may be something that you have to deal with if you have a very long running test that goes through multiple turns or multiple phases. You have now inserted this card into the game where it previously was not. But for most things, you just care about the destiny draw and then you're done. So it doesn't really have that much of a butterfly effect, right?
Okay, so if we want to have a card, so if we want to pull a destiny of 5, we have to have in the establishment of the test scenario a card ID that matches a destiny of 5, and then you would have needed that.
Okay. I found myself constantly needing to draw 1 or 2 or 0, and I was like, okay, screw this. So that's why I added that functionality here, so that work's already done for you, right? All these particular cards are already here.
Oh, okay.
The test rig automatically moves them out of play so that they're not going to impact your test most of the time. But then once you get to the point where you need the destiny, you just say, prepare this number destiny, and that's it.
So they're not in the deck, but they're in the game instance off in the out of bounds area.
Right, exactly. Out of play is the zone that it's going to.
Is it literally using the Star Wars CCG out of play zone? Because
Correct.
That could have consequences.
Well, in that case, we need to find a better place to put it then. But
yeah, we might need to. There are some cases like there are some virtual cards that say things like, Destiny +1 for each of your cards that are out of play, and so by putting these out of play, you've affected the game.
Yeah, okay, well that's why you actually do need to have good game knowledge when building this sort of thing. I was unaware of that, okay. But and it may be something that you end up needing to deal with in the future. But yeah, I tried to be super careful with the opening starting locations. Specifically, I did not want to pick one that said something like, oh, well, clone troopers are deploy -1 because, hey, that's good in 99% of cases, and it only screws over the person doing clone trooper testing. But, yeah, I have, in fact, found myself in those situations where I'm writing a test and beating my head against the wall trying to figure out why on earth is that modified. And, yeah, so that may be a bit of a caveat then that I was not expecting. We may be able to find a better way to do that then. I don't know if there's another zone that, move it to the void zone or something.
I recall that when we looked at the zones, the last time we had a call, actually, we saw some weird, mysterious zone that was called off the side of the table, and we had no idea what it was. So that might actually come in handy. I think you said the void is used for certain things, but there was a weird zone name that I didn't recognize at all.
So the void is actually that is actually pulled directly from Lord of the Rings, and I understand why TestBase kept it. When you play an interrupt or an event in Lord of the Rings, it goes to the void not in play, not anywhere else, while it is being evaluated, and then when it's done being evaluated, it's put into the lost pile. So that's what that represents. It's not actually something that, because it's not a game concept, no other cards can really reach into it. So that may be a good place for us to put it.
I don't know if it could work, but there's a out of deck zone where the shields and other cards can be.
Right, and yeah, that might be the place to put them too. Yeah, like yeah, we'll have to look into it and see, or maybe just go write test for those cards that you're thinking of.
There's that side of table not in play. No idea what that is.
Yeah, me neither. We'd have to look and see what cards are actually using this, but
right, we would have to look it up. Okay,
but yeah, all right. So so because we're going into this particular battle, we are going to be drawing battle destiny, because the point here is that we are making sure... Oh, wait a minute. I jumped to the wrong test. Cannot be voluntarily forfeit. So, basically, if there is battle damage, you cannot manually select... You cannot voluntarily select Chewbacca here, who is a furious captive, as your forfeit, because he's still a captive, right? So he's not allowed to be used. So in this case, we prepared the destiny draw for one apiece, and then we skip to the damage segment. Now you'll notice here that there is this draw destiny. When we skip to the damage segment, it is going to be like if we just drill down into all of these here. Oops. Skip battle destiny draws. So there are a whole bunch of subsections to the battle destiny where you have the opportunity to respond before the battle destiny draws. And then you have the actual option itself. If you are given the ability to draw destiny based on your ability, you have to choose yes or no. And then you can have responses to that destiny being drawn, and then you have responses to destiny draws complete for the player. As you can see, a whole lot of sub-steps that have all been kind of crammed together into or wrapped away in these helper functions. But so when you are skipping to the end of the power segment, you are going to have that option. So you do have to provide whether or not you want both players to draw destiny. There may be situations where you want one player to draw and one not, in which case someone will have to come in here and make an overloaded version of this that accepts the light side draw and the dark side draw. But I didn't have that circumstance, so I didn't write one. Okay, so now our battle should be complete. We want to double check or in the process of wrapping up, right? So we should make sure that the dark side won the battle. So for this particular one, rather than Boba Fett, I used Vader. Specifically so, he would have enough ability for him to draw that destiny, and so now there would be that attrition, right? So now we get to... Yeah, so after the battle, we're just going to double check all these basic attrition and battle damage values. In a more mature test base, you might not have to do this, especially after you've done it for 5 or 6 cards. You can say, okay, cool, our attrition and our battle damage stuff is working. I don't need to do this for every card. But since, it's nascent, I went ahead and added these additional checks. So we are double checking to make sure that there is an unpaid amount of attrition, which also, that counts as battle damage, right? I'm not totally sure on this. I know that it's other way around, and I know that it's I know that it's intricate and people get confused all the time. I figured this is probably good enough for somebody who actually knows what they're doing to use this, so that'll have to be good enough. So there are helper functions for checking to make sure that there is that it is waiting on the light side player to choose somebody to forfeit. We are ensuring that Chewie has not actually been hit, right? There were no weapons that were used during the weapon draw section here. And then we are going to make sure that that Chewie is not one of the card options that could be selected. And then this is not strictly necessary for this test, but again, because we don't have a lot of these tests in other places, I decided to put it in here. So first we grab the life force that is remaining for the light side, and then I have them pay the battle damage from the reserve deck, which is just going to loop, for however much damage is required, and pull it off the top of the reserve deck every time. And then we're going to make sure that we are at 1 less life than we started with. And then after all that, the battle should be concluded. There's no active battle. And everything has all been paid, and Chewbacca was not a legitimate target for the battle damage. Okay. After that, we then do another test where we're going to do exactly the same thing, but if Chewbacca was hit by a weapon, that of course he's forced to be forfeit, and Captive Fury does not block that. So I'm going to be skipping over most of this because it's almost exactly the same. We do have both Vader on the table, Vader and Boba Fett, but Boba Fett is going to be armed with the blaster so that he can hit somebody. And so after the battle has been set up by Captive Fury, we're then going to enter into the weapons segment. We're going to have the light side pass, and then we're going to have, whoops, go away. And then we're going to have the dark side actually fire Boba Fett's weapon, right? So they've once you have chosen it's one of the card actions you have available to you. So we tell dark side, use that card, the Boba's blaster. And now we should be asked, which target are you going to pick? So he's going to pick Chewie. We're going to pass the force use responses because the Boba Fett's blaster says, I believe you have to you use one force to do it. And then we're going to prepare a destiny because again we absolutely want to make sure that this goes through. So we just stick a destiny 7 on top of the deck, and then we pass all the weapon firing with the destiny draw. So this is another one of those functions that is going to have a whole lot of these